Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show where I talk about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Season 1, Episode 6 of Only Murders in the Building. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, I think this was a nice episode where we finally circle back to our detective. We haven't seen her since Episode 1, and we kind of get to learn a little bit more about her upbringing. The fact is, she thinks twins, triplets, and quadruplets are creepy, but kind of learning, it's kind of sad she has that perspective, she has a perspective of, we're born in this world alone, we kind of come into this world alone, and we kind of basically go out of this world alone, that we're always going to be alone. But the show she attached to was this show called Herman's Head, which I'm assuming that is an actual real show. Which that is a show I have never heard of. I actually just really quickly Googled and looked into it a little bit. Obviously, I could tell it was like a real show, but I don't think I've ever heard that show. To be fair, there's so many sitcoms, actually, like older school sitcoms, you're like, oh wow, I never knew that was a thing. But regardless, it ran for 3 seasons, I think, on Fox. When you looked at the cast, you're still like, oh wow, these are some actors I recognize. Because one of the actresses is Molly Hagan, I kind of best know as Abilene Walker on the Walker reboot on the CW, but there's also Hank Azaria, which know him from many different things, but him and Yeardley Smith are on the show together, who she voices Lisa in The Simpsons, when Hank Azaria voices many people, like Moe's at least one of them, but one of many people he voices on The Simpsons. But this came out like 91 to like 94, so this was like after The Simpsons started. Either way, I just thought that was just kind of an interesting little thing. I was like, oh, that's fascinating. Either way, I do like that this show is such an important aspect of our detectives, her upbringing to some extent, because for her, she connected with Herman, because for him it's like, oh, he has all these, like, it's all personified by these like people that live inside of his head. They each represent kind of like a facet and of himself, and kind of give him advice about how to handle things. Like the romantic one, which for her, she liked this whole aspect because it meant, like, right, Herman was never alone. And I think she kind of took a lot of those principles and aspects, and she kind of says, like, well, sadly, one day I decided to listen to that voice of mine, and now, I'm assuming, like, well, she has a significant other. I don't know if they clarify that they're married or not, but they're about to have a kid, Kareem, which Dee's not about that. Later on, she's like, Keith. Now that's a not lame ass name, is what she was kind of going about the whole Kareem situation. But I thought it was so interesting that her SO was listening to the Only Murders in the Building podcast, because Yard Dog had been like pumping them up. I'm like, yo, that's Lucian and his cousin Vaughn that Charles and Oliver met last episode. So that's actually pretty dope. Later on, they're up to like 17 subscribers. So it didn't give them the biggest bump. They went from 4 viewers to 17 subscribers. I think that's significant. Subscribers, it's something. I mean, they're not guaranteed to always listen, but still, that's something. So I thought that was kind of neat. Even later on, Charles was like, oh, 17? Like, oh, is that big? And it's like, and I think it was Oscar that was like, no, it's not. Especially when you compare it to, you just heard you heard Yard Dog's numbers last episode being 60,000 subscribers. So I just thought that was kind of a neat little thing. But for her, she hates, because I think it coincides, like the annoying thing about true crime podcasts and stuff like that. For her, it's like, this is my job. I'm good at it. I don't like all these nut jobs, kind of assuming that they're detectives. Like, I brought this up in the first episode, like how annoyed she was to run into Mabel, Charles, and Oliver, because them being the true crime nuts that they were. But, because her SO was kind of like, right, and they kind of have pointed out some stuff that, like, Tim Kono's death wasn't a murder. I mean, it wasn't a suicide, that might have been a murder, but she's like, no, it was open as shut. But when she actually gets to work, she realizes, like, oh, there's no toxicology report. She's like, oh, the phone never got sent off to that IT guy. And I don't know whether, I think she was suggesting, like, she didn't, or maybe, because the way she says it later on, I can't tell, she's implying, like, she kind of failed on some parts, and because of that, like, reopening the case would be a whole hassle, or is she suggesting like somebody on the inside is trying to keep that hush hush and they don't want, like, it's like, yeah, the moment like there's no toxicology report and the phone wasn't sent to the IT, it's just like everyone's like, yeah, hands off this case. It's just like, it's whatever, it's done. It's especially, I guess it's more so like she ruled it a suicide, so no one bothered putting in the extra work because she already did everything, and by saying like, oh, it was a suicide. So they try and make things right. Now realizing all of this, because like I love her SO being like, yo, so you're gonna come in like a badass, gotta take charge, but she was like, no, it's super not gonna go down that way. But she does want to help and try and sometimes you actually have to accept a helping hand, because her significant other was telling her not to be like, was a Jurgensen, that's the guy she works with, and that actor who plays him, I like see him in so many different things, but it's like, I guess he's that guy that's just gotten so jaded by the job that he's just kind of like, meh. And she didn't want Dee to become like that, and I think Dee didn't want to become that either. She's like, no, like, I am someone who does my job and I do it to the fullest. Like, she had talked about a case, you know, it's that one thing of like, right, she isn't one of those cops that keeps her day to herself. She does tell her significant other, like, yo, I had to deal with a dead little girl. It was an abusive father or stepfather type of situation. And she was like, it was rough. It was a rough day. And then having her SO throw in her face, like, oh, like, you weren't here to help with, like, the nursery and stuff. You weren't here to help with all this because you were busy with work. She's like, you picked the wrong day, the worst time. It kind of threw my job in my face, you know? So, but I think that speaks volumes that she's willing to talk about her day, when that's kind of like the stereotype about cops, that they don't talk about the day. I mean, considering what they deal with on a daily basis is understandable. So there's that whole situation of it all, but she ends up sending the phone at the end of the episode to Mabel, Charles, and Oliver, because they are the people who figured there was something more to this case. So if she can't really do anything, but she can lend them a hand and point, you know, give them whatever aid she can to make, you know, and it also helps her in the end, because it's like, right, if they can find more evidence, it'll probably allow her to kind of get the case more open and they can actually put away a bad guy. So there's that interesting part of things. But picking up with the situation last episode, there's a whole situation that them all gathered around the jury. Tim was going to meet with some guy named Cutter, but Cutter didn't show up. But instead, who shows up? None other than Mabel's mom, who is super mad, from first and foremost, for Charles and Oliver, because she's like, how old are you guys? Like 80? And Oliver being like, I'll have you know, I'm in my early mid-60s, you know, so I love that. But I felt like, oh, so much shade getting thrown their way, because it's like, right, you're hanging around my daughter. But it's because her mom worries. It's like, because now the past is getting drug up. It's like, not only has she found out about because all the stuff Mabel was connected to all those years ago. It's like, right, she's the one, because she was working so much and couldn't really be there for Mabel. So she's like, hey, my sister lives in this fancy place. She's rich. I'm gonna let my daughter hang out there and she'll be fine. She'll become a little bit more well-rounded, but did not realize that things, no one can predict that she'd eventually get connected to, like, oh, like one of her friends would end up getting murdered at the place and then another friend would go to jail. Like, no one could have seen that coming, but she's just trying to protect her daughter. So she wants Mabel taking the steps, moving in the right direction, because Mabel's been so obsessed with this murder. It's like, you haven't even, what about your design career, fashion design career, or something like that you were supposed to be like following, but she's more so focused on this, and she's kind of blaming them for like dragging Mabel into this. To be fair, they even said it, like, they didn't realize that this Tim thing, they didn't even know until recently about Mabel's connection to Tim. So like, when they're talking about this murder in this building, they had no idea all that Mabel went through losing Zoe like that. They didn't even know about her connection to Tim and just Oscar's circumstances. Like, they were completely unaware of all of that. So, but they did kind of feel bad in the long run, because especially when her mom talked about, like, have you ever done something that you regret and don't think you'll ever be able to forgive yourself for, which Charles and Oliver both have many, you know, especially Charles, both Charles and Oliver have stuff related to children, you know, because for him, it's the whole Will situation, taking out his college fund for the Splash and just how everything kind of played out then. Charles is kind of in a similar boat with Lucy. So they both have children related things that kind of play into like their major regrets. So they were going to just let Mabel go. It's like, right. And even Charles saying like, thank you, you made me feel alive for the first time in like a decade. So I guess this is goodbye, because they pretty much figured she wasn't going to, her mom probably wouldn't want her going back to the Arconia at all. But her and Oscar, obviously she wants to just help Oscar like move past everything, because all this talk about death and stuff like that, because they ended up discovering a photo. And the photo Tavo ended up sending Mabel, it's a very specific piece of jewelry that Tim has been looking for. Turns out it's the very same piece of jewelry that Zoe had on in one of the pictures. So my theory last episode was like, okay, like Zoe, we could tell like she was picking up jewelry from different places. So maybe she ended up like, either like she had a connection to Angel way back when, or she ended up stealing the wrong piece of jewelry from the wrong person type of thing. And it seems like that might be the case, because whoever killed her might have taken that, because like maybe because we know they stole stuff from, well, not they, that was more so Zoe, but she'd kind of give it to other people too. So like I said, either Zoe back then was actually working with Angel, like probably early days Angel, whoever it is, the black market jewelry dealer, or it could be that she just ended, like I said, stole from the wrong person, and because Oscar remembers Zoe didn't have that ring on when she died. When he saw her body after she had already died, like she didn't. He's like, you don't forget your dead girlfriend's body. So he's like, yeah, like she didn't have that ring on, so the killer most likely took it. So that's probably why, like, Tim is hoping that he can probably backtrack that. If he can find this piece, he can probably connect Angel to Zoe's murder. And I figured like this was about clearing Oscar's name. Like I said, had he always been working on this and he just didn't want Mabel involved, or like I said, the other theory I threw out last episode was that maybe his conversation with Mabel made him want to try and do something right this time. I don't know. So maybe that whenever his confrontation with Mabel was, maybe that's what sparked it, this in him to make him kind of go in this direction to try and clear Oscar's name. So I thought that was kind of an interesting development. At the same time, this is all going down, you know, Oliver and Charles have to really decide what they want to do going forward, because, you know, they don't want to keep doing the podcast, because, you know, it's like, right, they're just be using Mabel's tragedy and kind of profiting from it, so they're not too keen on that. I do love the whole conversation about like, right, we are strangers. It's like, we're randos. We don't really know each other. It's like, and Oliver's like, of course we know each other. He's like, and Charles is like, fine. Are my parents dead or alive? And he's like, dead. And Charles is like, lucky guess. This is like, yeah, but it's like, they're learning little bits here and there about each other, but they don't, it is right that they are kind of like strangers and randos to each other. We are just people who just happen to listen to the same podcast, and we kind of connected over this, you know? But, you know, those common interests, I mean, long-term friendships can be born from that. So I don't think this is going to turn into kind of a long-term friendship to some extent, but they end up going to see Teddy, who is watching Fallon, where Cinda, which once again, it's like, there's always layers to that whole thing of just like, because there's always this weird, interesting thing too, because it's like, right, that's on Fallon, which Fallon was also in The Boys, so it's like, is that almost trying to imply, which it's not implying that they're in the same universe, but it's just one of those weird things when you think about it too much. But it's like, yeah, because it's like, yeah, it's Tina Fey, who's just been on Fallon as Tina Fey, so it's weird just to have Tina Fey as like just some person named Cinda who's a podcaster, crime journalist. It's just layers to it. But she points out like, hey, there's this podcast, and they were kind of cracking jokes about it and stuff, about it being sponsored by this particular it's like, oh yeah, the number one suspect is Sting, and they're laughing. And then Teddy's like, you know what, you know what this means back in Greece, where like the main Demas family like place is? And he's like, they're gonna be shitting themselves because, like, apparently, I guess, I wonder is that true? It's like Jimmy Fallon, like, super big in Greece. You always find out those weird things, like David Hasselhoff is like, like the running thing is like the joke is all not joke, but I guess just a serious thing of like he's like a superstar in Germany, like he's a big household name where you like. If David Hasselhoff, but you probably wouldn't put him in the same tier that maybe he is in Germany. So it's always that interesting thing, like where like celebrities kind of like reach. So I wonder, it's like, is that true? Where it's like, oh, does Jimmy Fallon actually have a like big fan base in Greece? But I thought that was neat, and Teddy's so happy about it, and it kind of works out because now their numbers have started going up, which I love. That it's like, oh, why am I not going up? And it's like, Charles is like, because your phone's in airplane mode again, and he was like, see, we're not randos. We do know each other because you kind of know the quirk that I leave my phone in airplane mode. It's like, yeah, we're getting to know each other, buddy. I think so. But Teddy wants them to keep doing the podcast. He's willing to pay them, for the next 3 episodes, like $50,000. And you're like, wow, that's especially your boy Oliver could use that money considering he's kind of a little behind payments. But when that's all said and done, they're kind of reluctant to do it. But then I love that Teddy went on this story about his grandmother, which that's, once again, just learning a lot of history I knew nothing about. What was it, like, well, I think he said, like, the Greek and Armenian massacres. I know, the Greek and Armenian Holocaust was the word he used. I was like, oh, I'd never heard about that before. But it's like, yeah, like, people from Turks had invaded, and it led to a whole thing, and basically they didn't believe in the banks anymore, or the banks were in such turmoil that basically those who had any family fortune or whatever basically traded that for like gold coins that they would wear around their neck. And his grandmother, trying to get out and make her way to America, had to trade all her coins, but a soldier let her keep 2. One as a good luck charm, and one that could be the foundation of kind of like her family fortune, or like a house or something. So one of them does end up going to her son as a kind of like family heirloom and a reminder, and the one that's kind of kept as luck. And Teddy says that him and his dad never saw eye to eye, so his dad rather keep it himself, which they're like, oh, well, obviously, like, your dad must have eventually passed it down to you because you have this. Or he's like, or I dug him up and took it from his cold, dead hands. And there's just silence, and then he starts laughing, and they're like, oh, I just love Charles, what the fuck? And Oliver be like, oh, yeah, you fooled me, Teddy. So it's like, right, kind of pushing them more towards, like, no, you guys should do this and need to do this. So they contemplate whether or not to do it. In fact, they were going to rip up the check. I thought to myself, the moment you rip up that check, you're going to find out that, Mabel was like, no, we can do this. It's like, oh, why didn't you come in sooner when we still had the check? But Charles notices that Teddy did say that he kind of does all this side business stuff through another company, and it's called Angel Inc. So they're pointing it towards Teddy. I don't think it's Teddy. I think it's going to end up being his son. Like I said, when we first got introduced to Teddy's son, I'm like, that's such a background person that I'm like, that seems like that's going to be the case. Like, he seems like he might be the suspicious person, especially with this whole Angel Inc. thing. So it might be, once again, Zoe might, because we don't know anything about Teddy, like, significant other, or like his like sons, like whether there's like a mom in the picture or anything like that. So we never know. That ring could have been like the one that Zoe stole, could have been something that's like the last reminder of his mom, and maybe all those years ago Teddy's son killed her, and now he's been running this whole operation. Or maybe it is Teddy, I don't know. But maybe it's just someone else utilizing it. It's just like, oh yeah, like the hat, like, because even his grandmother's name, it basically, what was it, like, it translates to basically Angel, along with the company name being Angel Inc. So I love that whole thing of our prime sponsor just turned into our prime suspect, and then Oliver being like, hey, that'd make a nice last line of an episode. And then the episode ends. I was like, oh, I love how cheeky you are with that. That's actually really good. So that is interesting. And Mabel is back on the team, like, being like, sorry, I lied to you. And they're like, Yeah, a lot. Like how much you've lied, someone could pretty much call you psychopathic at this point in time. But it's like, yeah, she wants to see this through. She was able to convince her mom to let her do this because, and I love the analogy her mom made. It's like, right, I could never read you bedtime stories because you would always skip to the end because you always had to know what happened. Which I think, everyone has that urge. It's just like, oh, I want to hurry up and know the end result. I want to know the end of the story. I want to know how this all ends. Like, yeah, I mean, but only a true monster skips to the very, very end. Just because some people just can't stand the suspense. It's like, oh, I gotta know. But only a true sociopath does that. I'm saying that jokingly. But yeah, I just thought that was kind of a neat analogy. And it's just like, for her, it's like, I have to see this through just because it's like, it is something so important to her. So it's going to be interesting because once again, Oscar's trying to put this all behind him, start his life fresh. But for Mabel, she can't move on from the past until she sees this through. So she's going to continue to podcast with them. I even love Oscar being like, okay, we want to hear you say it. And also, I want to hear you finally say, like, which one of us is your favorite? Honestly, if she had to pick it, most likely it would be Charles. But, I'd be quite surprised if she's like, Oliver, actually, you're my favorite. But it's probably like, Oliver, you're my favorite. And then once back is turned, Charles, you're actually my favorite. She probably, would lie to both of them behind each other's back, being like, you're my favorite. No, you're my favorite. So I could definitely see her doing something like that. But with a new suspect in mind, obviously learning what she had learned about the ring that Zoe had, that this is all, once again, like I figured, it all has to be connected. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see where things kind of go from here. I am curious, are we going to get any more with the detective other than another pop-in in the sense of, will Dee be here at the end when they make it further into the investigation, or when things, I mean, she might be the one kind of, with everything kind of being set up, that they're kind of going to end up taking the fall to some extent. So I'm assuming Dee might be the one that's kind of brought in to kind of arrest them, considering this is kind of her case. So we'll have to wait and see where all this takes us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.